Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to the second official episode on the Ironogeist channel. Joining me here today is Philip Swanson in New York and Fergus from Dublin. We were supposed to have Jacob Little on, but he had something come up and could not join us today. Hopefully, he will be with us for the second episode of the SpongeBob Symbolism special. If you saw the trailer on my channel, you would know that roughly 127 people may or may not have been anticipating this. So the energy is high, and we're going to talk about a lot of things SpongeBob. We're going to talk about the symbolism ingrained in the show. We're going to talk about some social commentary that the creators may or may not have intended to put in the show. And this is going to be a pretty interesting episode. Philip here is an aficionado of symbolism, and Fergus here is well aware of social dynamics and is well equipped to make commentary. So this should be epic, to say the least. We're going to start by talking about what SpongeBob is exactly for those who aren't aware. It is a children's television show that is still airing on Nickelodeon, which is a channel for children's cartoons and television shows. The first episode of SpongeBob SquarePants, properly called, aired on May the 1st, 1999, and it's still going. It's still going. So you might be wondering, why are we talking about symbolism and universal patterns and social commentary coming from a children's television show, a cartoon? Well, as it happens, SpongeBob SquarePants is what a friend of mine, William, called a cultural touchstone for our generation. Philip, Fergus, and I are all in the same generation. We all fall under Generation Z. Um, and I think the cutoff for Generation Z is about 2011. So people born between roughly 1995 and 6 and 2011 fall under Generation Z. You can tell that SpongeBob is a cultural touchstone because of the memes, because of the references. It is not uncommon to find people talking about SpongeBob in social circles or making references to SpongeBob episodes or the movie. Fergus here has done it many times in our conversations. Philip has a few times, but it's kind of a universal language in this generation. If you make a SpongeBob reference, the odds that someone in the room that's in your generation understands the reference are pretty high, and you can communicate a lot of sentiments with ease by referencing SpongeBob. For example, there are these screens that come up in SpongeBob episodes. Time card, I think they're called. So some event will be happening in SpongeBob, and then a time card will come up that says 3 hours later, and then it elapses to 3 hours later in the episode, and there's a French guy that does it, and it's like 3 hours later, and it's iconic. Fergus, can you do your impression or?
One eternity later.
Yeah.
One eternity later.
And it's iconic. It's iconic. Everyone knows that the time cards. And so that's just a little bit of a touch on how important it is in our generation. If you go into Google or Bing or DuckDuckGo or anything and search SpongeBob memes, you'll find a lot. And so we're going to talk about some of the symbolism of SpongeBob. Why exactly is it so important to our generation? What kind of commentary does it make? And we're going to dive right into it by introducing some of the characters on SpongeBob. And I'm going to put images of these characters up on the screen after production here. So we've got 7 main characters that could get talked about today. SpongeBob, number 1. Patrick, number 2. Squidward, 3. Sandy Cheeks, 4. Mr. Krabs, 5. Plankton, 6. And Gary, last but not least, number 7. And there are auxiliary characters too, like
A few moments later.
there are auxiliary characters as well, such as Karen, Plankton's computer wife. Fergus has a thing or two to say about Plankton's computer wife, Karen. So Fergus, could you take us right into it raw?
Yeah, and another one you didn't mention, who we'll come back to at some point, is Pearl, the daughter
Pearl.
of Mr. But really, I have to give credit to Julius, Agnieszka, and Petya. I was in their company earlier today, and what I'm about to say about Karen came from them. But basically, why is Plankton married to a computer wife? Like, what the hell is that supposed to mean? But they were talking about how it symbolizes parasocial relationships. So much time on technology. We listen to podcasts, we watch TV, blah. And some people might listen to Joe Rogan more than they actually talk to other real people. And so they they think they have this sort of quasi relationship with Joe Rogan, but it's a complete. I mean, it's not a complete fabrication, but it's not an authentic relationship because Joe Rogan doesn't have a clue who that person is. You know, there's millions and millions of people who feel the same way. And obviously a real relationship, there has to be reciprocity involved, right? So there's an inherently illusory aspect of those kinds of relationships. Like it's not real, and it's not, you can't touch it, like literally. So that's something about her. And another thing about kind of sexual intimacy in our age is that a lot of what people do for kicks is not actually with other people. You know, it's like you go and ask 115-year-olds, like, how many of you have been intimate with a woman? It's like, okay, this many. How many of you have watched people online doing X, Y, and Z? And I guarantee you the number will be higher. And no one really likes to talk about that, but that's like the reality of our situation. And so there's a real kind of falseness and hyper stimulation, but complete and utter desolation about a lot of sexuality today, and kind of how we encounter sexuality. So I don't know, and it's like the guy's wife is a freaking computer. It's like the hyper exaggeration of some of those phenomena that are going on in relations between people in that realm, you know. And maybe you can go from this. Maybe you can talk at some point about why you talked about exaggeration as like a central thing in the show. Well, yeah, that's just a little bit about the non-intimacy of intimate relationships in the world today, and yeah, the Plankton and Karen relationship as a metaphor for that. Right. Yeah, just sorry. Last thing is just examples for specifics. It's like, you know, you've Instagram, people liking and commenting and like following each other as like, that's like now in advance. It's like, oh, I'm going to follow this person and like 10 of their pictures. But meanwhile, you can do that with 200 people like in a day. So it's like, that's not an advance because you cannot make an advance on 200 people in a day, you know? Right. And then also the likes of Tinder. It's like, oh, I'm going to like make an advance to this person by giving you a swipe in a certain direction. But it's completely fake, or largely. And then probably the worst example is OnlyFans, where you have people paying for like, I don't know what you'd even call it. Would you say personal porn or like quasi-personal porn? It's like, if you're one of these 100, like it's pretty awful. And that's all kind of facilitated by technology. So anyway, there you go.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, and there are some interesting sexual elements to SpongeBob. Not even just strictly about, you know, like sexuality as in like sex and copulation, blah. But we actually have some interesting symbolism in SpongeBob, the character, the sponge, who is sexually ambiguous. There are episodes where he fills the role of mom, and an episode where SpongeBob and Patrick adopt a clam, and Patrick fills the archetype of lazy dad that sits on his recliner and watches television, which all parents understand, right? And this is part of the show that appeals to parents too. So it wasn't just like a dredge, annoying show that came on. Parents could kind of watch along and be like, you know. But he also has, you know, a full-time job and works and is somewhat responsible. So, and he presents himself as a man or as a male. So he fills both roles. But there's another interesting aspect of sexuality I'd like to touch on, which is the ambiguous bathrooms in Rock Bottom. Rock Bottom, I'll probably put a picture here of Rock Bottom, is a place where SpongeBob and I think Patrick end up in one of the episodes of SpongeBob, and it is mysterious and strange, and everything there seems to be inverted. They speak a language that SpongeBob and Patrick do not understand.
What?
The bus schedule, the next bus.
I can't understand your accent.
Next bus to Bikini Bottom.
Oh, why didn't you say so?
There's another interesting thing about the bathrooms in Rock Bottom, and I'll probably put a picture of the bathrooms here too. Philip has a good bit to say about the confusing bathrooms in Rock Bottom. So Philip, take it away.
Yeah, so SpongeBob and Patrick, they get off the bus, and Bikini Bottom, like we've already talked about, is, or maybe it was touched on in the trailer, but Bikini Bottom is everything in SpongeBob works as an inversion, which we'll touch on more of those elements in a bit. But they go even further down. Right? They take a bus, they go straight down into a trench basically, and are at the bottom of the ocean. Hence the name rock bottom. So SpongeBob and Patrick get there, and Patrick has to use the bathroom, and there's a question mark on the bathroom doors. There's a right erect upside up question mark, and then there's an upside down question mark. And so they wait for someone to come out of the bathroom so they can tell what it is, if it's a man or a woman. Well, the creatures that keep coming out of the bathrooms are so ambiguous that they can't tell what's coming out of the bathroom. So they just sit there and wait. So we can see this as, right, the question mark is kind of like the snake, right? So we can see this as sort of like an underworld, even more sort of upside down type of thing, right? So in scripture, the word Sheol literally means riddle or question, something that's not answerable. And we kind of see this phenomena in our own day, right, with the sort of the transgender bathroom kinds of things, right? So you have these stories all the time of men going into women's bathrooms, and you're like, well, is that a man? Is that a woman? I'm not sure. So now we are having to ask ourselves today, right? Like, is this, like, what's coming out of this? Is this some kind of, probably going to get banned on YouTube for me saying this, right? Is this some kind of coming out of this bathroom? Like, what is this creature, right? And the symbolism of question mark is, it is the snake. It's slithery, it's curved, it's right, it's that which points away from the center, right? So it slithers around it. Snakes don't really have much of an identity because it's constantly shifting, constantly changing. And this is what we see in flux with the whole transgender thing. It's this constantly shifting, constantly changing thing. So it's fitting that happens at the bottom, right? Because when you get to the bottom of things, right, we see this in our day-to-day experience. You pick up dust and you don't have like a creature dust or like grass, right? There's lots of grass, but you can't like singularly identify grass like you can a human being. So the further you go to the bottom of things, the more sort of multiplicity arises. And even if we want to look at this from a very materialist level, right, the lower we go into reality, the more and more multiplicity it is, right? So you are made up of a bunch of cells. Those cells are made up of parts. Those parts are made up of atoms, and so on and so forth. So of course it makes sense that there's this weird multiplicity going on here, this constantly shifting, this constantly changing, even to the level, most especially fitting to the level of the bathrooms.
Right. And I think, probably for context, this would be important. Bikini Bottom, the place where the television show takes place, is underwater, in case that wasn't already, clear from the characters being underwater, animals. The name is interesting, Bikini Bottom, right? Bikini Bottom. And we intuitively associate things that are low or bottom with things that are like bad quality or inverted to some degree or just not preferable. And you can see this in real daily life and in the English language. We have a term for stuff that just kind of sucks as bottom of the barrel, right? And you don't want things that are bottom of the barrel. So Bikini Bottom is already bottom, and there are a lot of inverted patterns in Bikini Bottom, right? You have the sexually ambiguous sponge, the Patrick the Star, which represents something that we'll get to in a little bit, is actually an inverted character, and things of that matter. And you don't want those. You got Karen, the computer wife, inversion across the board. So if Bikini Bottom is already the bottom of the barrel, so to speak, then what is rock bottom, right? Can you go lower than low, Philip?
No, you can't, right? Because even in Bikini Bottom, there's light, right? You can see things. Light is what gives us knowledge of things. When you get to rock bottom, it's interesting. In the episode, you notice it's pitch black. And this is why in real life experience, like the phenomenon of sea monsters, it's these weird, shifty, sort of hybrid creatures that lurk at the bottom of the sea. You go down to the bottom of the sea now, and there's these weird fish with these lights on their head, and they have like all sorts of, strange kind of jaws, and it's madness, right? Like there's something more creepy about those things than the fish and sharks even at the top. Like people love to go down and they'll scuba dive in shallow waters, but nobody wants to go down to the bottom of the sea. Why? Because it's dark. You can't see. So things are ambiguous. Things are strange. Things are weird. And then because of that, you have this weird hybridity and multiplicity. Because there's a lack of knowledge, it makes sense that you don't know what the creature is. Because there's a lack of light, you can't, the light and the creature, the knowledge and what the thing is are interconnected. it's so you go down there and you try to see what something is, but one, there's no light, so you can't see what it is, and two, even if you can sort of see what it is, you can't actually name the thing. You can't give it a name. You can't give an once again, to go with the back to the bathrooms, you can't give an identity to it, if that makes sense.
Right, right. And in a way, it's because we have no way of relating to something that's so inverted. And so since we can't relate to it, we can't identify with it.
Exactly. Yeah. We can't identify. We can't integrate it into society. And so where does it go? To the very bottom.
Right. So that raises an interesting point of inquiry, which is, what are some examples of that in real life? Things that are below, in a patterned manner of speaking, things that are low that we can't identify or don't understand. Fergus, does anything come to mind whenever I say that?
Just really, the first thing that came to mind was sewage.
No, yeah, sewage. Yeah, sewage goes below. Yeah, because that's where it belongs. It's suited to the below.
And it's also, I mean, no one wants anything to do with the sewage. Like, it's one thing. I don't know. It's one thing to talk about. Oh, it's like down mysterious. It's cool, dark tunnels or whatever. But like, no one wants to go into the sewage system.
Right. Yeah, and no one wants to go into the catacombs either. Where death is the theme, right? And catacombs are analogous to hell in that sense, right? Like, it is below the earth, and that is where death belongs, right, Philip?
Yeah, because that's what hell is. Hell, once again, Sheol literally means riddle, question. It's unidentifiable, right? It's not this. We can touch on it later, but it's not the same images of like hellfire and brimstone. It's two separate sort of realities. Hell is just that which is below us, and that's why it's scary to us, because it is where these weird creatures, right? When we see images of hell, right? The demons are what? They don't look like angels, right? They're these animals with all of these all of these weird animal body parts attached in random places. So you see like crotches on the face or whatever. So you have all of these sort of inverted things. And once again, the lower you go down into the scales, right? People aren't creeped out by bunny rabbits, for example, but people are creeped out by spiders. Why? Because spiders are lower on the chain. Right? There's not many people creeped out by like dogs and cats, but when people see like a praying mantis or a tarantula, they lose their mind, because it is
right.
Because it's there's more multiplicity, and less of a way in which to identify the thing.
Right. Yeah, and I think there's something to be said about.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Just Philip. I mean, I'm just gonna go. Well, what about? Right? But what about what you just talked about, right? How does that relate? How does that apply to snakes and, like, I don't know, dangerous animals that aren't like creepy crawlies, or like I'm trying to think of an example, like a scary dog. I don't know, like other animals are threatening. So I don't know. Yeah. What you said about the multiplicity. What do you mean by that?
Right. Okay. So like what's scary about a tarantula, right? Well, it's this weird thing with an abdomen that has 8 legs and hair on it.
Okay, so you're talking about the fact that it can kill you.
Well, not only can it kill you, but it's slithery. It's kind of slinky. It's constantly it's shifty, right? Now maybe spiders necessarily aren't a shifty creature, right? But they're a tricky creature. So they'll make a web, catch things into it, and how do they eat? Right? We're creeped out by the way spiders eat. They wrap stuff in their web, and then they suck the blood out of it. So they use a trap. Right. So in a way, we could call them shifty, because it is a trick, right? Like the snake tricks. That's why it's related to the question mark. Right. We can understand a trick and a question, something that's not answerable, to be the same thing. Does that make sense?
I think so. Yeah.
I think what makes them especially creepy, and the reason we think that their traits are so creepy, is partly because they live in a reality that we're not familiar with.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
We're in the same space, but they live one layer lower, and living on the ground and in the corners and in the weeds is something that we just don't understand, because the weeds in the corners to the spider are different than the weeds in the corners to us. We have our own weeds and corners that we kind of go in, and I think some of the weeds and corners that humans are suited to are social groups. Certain social groups, because we're social animals, are kind of like the weeds in the corners that we go to feed in a way. But spiders do it in a little bit more of a carnal way, and that creeps us out.
Yeah.
There are 2 things that I'd like to touch on now. I touched on in the beginning. Why are we putting importance on a children's television show? What is really there to be said? And we're making all these extrapolations about this seawater cartoon, but did the creators really intend to have all of this drawn out from their show, or is there something like what Fergus said in the trailer, a sort of meta ethic or meta narrative that kind of underlines the whole show? What do you guys think about that?
Fergus, do you want to go first?
No, well, I suppose it was my question. I was like, well, was this all pre-planned that this would be an allusion to that and that would be a metaphor for that? Like, did they all get together and say, oh, we're going to represent, the underworld as it's discussed in mythology by, our creation underwater and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, is it that, or is it that without realizing it, the stories that kind of grip us are stories that indicate these universal patterns that we have deep in us that make sense to us because they just make sense and they're a reflection of reality as it is, and we just understand that without really understanding why. And I noted as you clipped in the trailer, Jordan Peterson, obviously he'll talk about all these things in fairy tales and how like something will seem like it doesn't make any sense if you were to think of it like as is it realistic, but we just are completely okay with that even though it's completely unrealistic because it's indicating what would you even say, it's indicating something true about reality that makes sense, and for that reason we don't question it. So for example, well, what are some examples? He talks about like a frog talking. Peterson always talks about a frog talking, or like, I don't know. What are some other ones he talks about? Pinocchio. I know the fairy tale, so I can't really elaborate on that. But maybe Philip, could you talk about that he gives, and then answering the question?
Maybe not a specific example from Peterson because I'm not as familiar with him. But the point is like we have these like a basic example is we just have these stories, right? They're not based on like things we just think about, like we just think up and we're like, oh, I have a good idea, let's make a frog talk. That's not the point of the story. The story is like the frog talk. If we want to use the example of a frog talking, right? It's that which is it is an inversion, right? It's that creature from the slime coming up and saying something, right? And we see this pattern in the book of Genesis, right? It's the creature from the slime, the snake from the earth, right? The most subtle of the creatures on the earth speaking. So there's that. It's the inverted pattern sort of coming up and talking to us. So we have these. So the stories, right? We write stories. We have stories because they explain to us how reality works. Because there's two sort of parts to it, right? There's that metacognition part. There's that cognition part that Peterson talks about, where we take our consciousness and supplant it onto, write it out in the story. But the thing is that consciousness helps us make sense of the world. So like it's a top down and a bottom up thing. So we inherently recognize these patterns, right? We inherently, even if we want to use a different word, these consistencies within things, right? Like I talked about, like most people are creeped out by the bottom of the sea. Most people are creeped out by spiders. Like these are common fears that people have about these things. So we have these stories to help organize those things and put them in sort of a way that helps us recognize them better. Because we learn, and we learn best through, and we make sense of things through a narrative, right? Like you don't see like when I tell you about my day, I don't just give you like a list of like biological phenomena that's happening to me, right? I tell it to you in an order of events which you make sense of, right? And I give to you what's important. I give to you the important thing. What's that?
There's a hierarchy.
Yeah, there's a hierarchy, right? I give to you these important events, and we both agree on a pattern because it's a real pattern that's there, and that's why we both agree on it. Right? So there is an agreement.
Right. So you're saying like, what I think the moral of the story, to keep it like to keep it back to base, is like there are things, whether objects or people or animals, behave in a certain way. Even like a door doesn't behave in that it chooses an action, but it opens and closes. And we understand that doors do that. So if a story were to be told, where a door neither opens nor closes, we're enigmatized by that, right?
Yeah.
Because like why a door opens and closes, why can't this door open or close? And that says something about reality that we kind of understand intuitively. And that's like an example of a pattern. And then the pattern's the door opens and closes, and then the inversion of the pattern is the door will neither open nor close. Simply put, is that
Precisely? Yeah, precisely. That's
Okay.
really good.
well, that will lead us right into another example of inversion in Bikini Bottom, which is Patrick the Star. Patrick the Star. We understand that stars symbolize certain things. They symbolize brightness, luminosity, enlightenment, governance, and things of that sort. Patrick is a starfish, but he doesn't seem to embody any of these traits. In fact, he seems to be quite stupid and base, and so stupid that you might say, "What have you been living under a rock?" And actually, he does live under a rock. Philip, what's the deal with the star?
Yeah, so stars and angels were not separate in the ancient world, and even today, like stars are little small dots in the sky that give us light in order to see, right? They're associated with knowledge. The sun's a star. We associate it with wisdom, with, like you said, governance, right? We can look up at the sky, or we used to be able to look up at the sky and see what direction we're going in, what time of year it is, all those sorts of things, right? So the stars are which are above us that give us knowledge, right? And if we take it from the view of the stars are angels, right? Angels don't have the same kind of body that we do. They're lighter, they're more subtle, right? So they're up in the sky. Well, the problem is with Patrick, right? Is Patrick is none of those things. Patrick does not have a subtle body. He's actually quite fat, right? And this is made known that Patrick has a round belly, right? Like he does not have a light, subtle body, right? Stars are supposed to be up at the sky. Where's Patrick? Well, he's at the very bottom place, right? He literally lives under a rock, like you mentioned earlier. Stars are supposed to guide and govern us. Patrick does none of those things, right? He's always constantly forgetting things. He can't remember anything. He doesn't know where he's going. He's extremely stupid. And when he does try to rearrange patterns of reality, right? Like there's that episode, I think Sing a Song of Patrick is the name of the episode, where Patrick tries to play a song from the highest point in the city, which is the radio tower, right? Where, once again, we could say patterns are sent forth to help sort of organize and control the populace. So Patrick goes up at the top of the radio tower and plays his song, right? Well, instead of ordering and governing the town, what does the song do? The patterns in the song are such that people start crashing into each other. People's heads start exploding. People's eyeballs start popping out. People are jealous. Like a guy's head explodes. One of the characters says "lucky." So when Patrick does try to be the principality that he's supposed to be, it never ends up working out for him. And then the jokes that the show plays later on is, there's a couple episodes where Patrick ends up being quite intelligent, and we all think it's hilarious, right? Because we know the show's inverted when we think the proper order of things is hilarious, right? So that's the deal with Patrick.
So is Patrick a fallen star then, so to speak?
We could say that he's a fallen angel, if you will, right? Because in a sense, he drags other people into his stupidity, right? He's constantly dragging SpongeBob into his stupidity, right? There's that episode where the worm comes and he has a really stupid idea, right? He says, people come up with all the ideas and he's like, well, why don't we take Bikini Bottom and push it somewhere else?
We should take Bikini Bottom and push it somewhere else!
That idea may just be crazy enough to get us all killed!
Push!
So they all decided to get on board with this stupid idea. Well, what happens? They all push it towards the edge of the cliff, and the worm comes and destroys the entire town.
Push! Push!
Right. So in a way, right, while it's not, Patrick isn't portrayed as like explicitly like evil or something, we could say he's a fallen principality in that he directs people away from what they should be doing and leads them into a really stupid idea. And go ahead.
So Philip, if the world of SpongeBob is a basically a just collective inversion of everything. Is that the nub of the joke, or is there a moral of the story? Do you know what I mean? Like, what's the point of it all?
I mean, I think once again, this is coming in an era where it was released in 1999, right? Well, this is, I mean, historically speaking, I was a little kid at the time, so I'm not 100% sure of all of the patterns and sort of politics and whatever of the time. But like, this was an era when people were going crazy, right? People were selling everything they have because they thought the world was coming to an end. So in a way, in its historical context, it's kind of fitting. In terms of its entertainment value, like, we find things funny, like we find incongruities funny. All right, we find inverted things funny. And the reason SpongeBob is so hilarious is because it's one giant inversion. Is a thing, like a dog driving a car. Well, why is that funny? Like, there's nothing particularly funny about dogs and nothing particularly funny about cars in and of themselves. Like, we don't laugh about either thing on their own. Well, we know because dogs can't drive cars, we think that's hilarious. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's kind of a way of, sorry, Fergus, yeah.
No, you go ahead. It's a way of what?
No, it's a way of coping, right? Because deep down we desire a consistent reality, and like, we live and breathe and act like things are going to remain consistent, but they don't in small ways, and the laughter is kind of a way of recognizing an incongruity, and it's an expression of like an existential tension, basically. Like,
Yeah.
why the hell is that dog driving that car? Dogs can't drive cars, right? Cars can't be driven by dogs, and dogs aren't smart enough to even try. Farting when it's not allowed will always be funny. Whether you're 10 years old or you're 70, if someone rips a fat fart in the middle of a meeting, it's going to be funny because it's a massive social incongruity. It's like, you shouldn't fart in a meeting, but everybody farts. That's what's going to always make it funny, is that everybody knows that someone's farting at pretty much any given time. Statistically, we've all farted during this, call at least once. So anyway.
A few moments later.
So on to another subject is the person of SpongeBob himself, the character of SpongeBob. He's the main character of a children's television show, and as we all know, children are ridiculously impressionable. And so we have to look at SpongeBob and say, what are the positive things about SpongeBob, and what are the negative things? What can be gained from paying attention to SpongeBob, and what can be lost as it pertains to his character, how he acts? Is he a good role model? Is he not? Is it a mixed bag, and can we get one or the other? Fergus, I'm guessing you have an opinion on this.
Well, yeah, as you know, my opinions are rarely given, frankly, or forthrightly. That's why I like to ask other people for theirs. But on SpongeBob, I have a kind of a first impression, and then I'm going to talk about an alternative view that I heard today. But at first glance, he's extremely scared and like emotional and very far from masculine. You could say, oh, well, he's just a boy. Well, he's not a boy because he has a full-time job and he doesn't go to school and he lives in a house on his own. So, like, in a sense, he's an adult, but he's very pathetic in, there's something like really, really inherently childish about him. And like, there was an example given to me today where he and Patrick, they buy a box for a TV. Sorry, they buy a flat screen TV. They buy a huge, big TV. And they throw the TV away and they just play in the box.
I need sleep to refuel my imagination tanks.
I still can't believe those pirates beat all those robots.
Get see you in the morning.
Good night, Patrick.
And they're playing in this make-believe world in the box. And they're having great fun. And the person I was talking to was saying, oh, that's very, like, there's something beautifully creative and optimistic about all that, And yes, but like, you don't want the adults in the world like pretending, like playing pretend, like that's not, I know that's a thing for children to do, what else about SpongeBob? The notion of him being porous, like he doesn't have a backbone. He's very impressionable. He's extremely, extremely naive. He doesn't have any like definition. Like, you can squeeze a sponge, you can expand it, you can whatever. So he also doesn't have any like he doesn't have any adult relationships, as in like there's never any talk of him like, I don't know, and I don't want to sound like it's like social engineering or whatever, but like, it is a fact that people are delaying graduation into adulthood longer today than they would have in the past. So in that sense, it's a reflection of the age that we're in. Like you've guys, like the other day, I saw a man in a wealthy part of Dublin wearing pajama bottoms at the grocery store. It's like that did not happen, I don't think, in the days of yore. There's something very adolescent about adults these days, and like everyone's on their phone, everyone's reduced to being like a 13-year-old girl and the anxieties that come with that. But you have like our parents and grandparents getting sucked into this world of bullshit online, and everyone kind of is reduced to the same teenage anxieties because of these phones. Anyway, that's nothing to SpongeBob really. But SpongeBob is an adult who acts like a child. That's basically the moral of the story. There are positives to SpongeBob, and I'm going to read a quote here, which we can maybe discuss. So give me a second. So this is a quote from some prominent person's Twitter that was sent to me. SpongeBob is one of the greatest role models of all time. In fact, he's a paragon of bulletproof mindset. Look at the dynamic of the show. Squidward and SpongeBob ostensibly live the same life. They both work dead-end jobs at the Krusty Krab. They know the same people and live on the same street. Yet Squidward is apathetic and depressed, while SpongeBob is already happy and having fun. Same life, different attitude. Will you maintain your childlike wonder, looking for the adventure in life, or will you be beaten into submission by the system, lulled into a catatonic existence of mediocrity? Me, I'm SpongeBob. So anyway, this person was referring to SpongeBob as obviously a positive figure. But in that picture, ironically, they have the picture of SpongeBob where he's the inflated arms and he blows up his arms to look like a big strong guy. But that's complete bullshit. Like he doesn't actually have strong arms. It's all just like, it's fake, so he's not actually in that episode being strong and tough or whatever, Anyway, there's
right.
What do you guys think? Is SpongeBob hero or villain?
No, I mean, I don't think I wouldn't necessarily call him either, right? Once again, it goes back to his sort of ambiguous nature, right? He's always trying to be helpful, but at the same time, he like screws things up, but then somehow finds a way to like fix it all in the end, right? Like you were saying, I mean, I don't like. It's weird, right? You don't know what to make of him because we're like Squidward kind of like, to go back to the box episode, kind of represents this sort of hardcore materialist, right? He's like, there's nothing in that box, even though he hears the noises, there's like robots fighting, and then there's like a pirate fight and all these other sorts of things that are going on in the box that he can clearly hear. But when he goes in, right, he's such a hardcore materialist that he can't see or hear or do anything. So in a way, we can criticize him for like, he's in a right, like, he's being childish. We shouldn't act like that as men, blah blah blah. But at the same time, it's like, well, in a way, this is in order to get the pattern right, you kind of have to use its reverse, right? You have to reuse the reverse of the thing to correct stuff. So in order to be, like Christ says, in order to be like a child, in order to enter the kingdom of heaven, you must become like a child, right? You must lower yourself, even though heaven in our experience is up, right? So I think this is what SpongeBob ultimately does, is he inverts the pattern, but to its correction, if you will, right? So he is this kid, he is this sort of thing. We think, oh, what a child, we shouldn't be doing this as men. But at the same time, it's like, well, in a sense, he's redirecting things and realigning them back to their proper orientation, if that makes sense.
Just by virtue of his pure innocence.
Yeah, in a way, right? Because he is like, he's innocent, right? Like he even though Squidward hates his guts, right? When he sees that Squidward's upset, he's like, oh, poor Squidward, we should do something to cheer him up, right? And he ends up doing something that pisses Squidward off. But then it ends up working out for SpongeBob in the end.
I think the reason SpongeBob is so powerful is for that exact reason. But people, I think, see how SpongeBob, the character, typifies a lot of what we want to have actually as members of the world and Gen Z, right? Is we realize that there's a certain amount of stuckness that we kind of experience in the world. We have to work these dead-end jobs and go through the drudgery of society that makes people like Squidward so depressed. How does SpongeBob go through all of it, still remaining happy and innocent and going to work and being just fine and living on his own and even taking care of a pet? And a lot of people in our generation feel stuck like SpongeBob, but want to not be Squidward. And I think that's the power of that dynamic. So I wouldn't call SpongeBob a hero, but if he were to be a hero, he would be a hero insofar as he typifies what we would like to actually experience in this world, assuming there's no other way to escape and not have to work a 9 to 5 at Krusty Krab and so forth. But we all have our Krusty Krab jobs and, our depressed neighbors that hate everything and hate themselves. How can we be more like SpongeBob in that regard? Where's the joy in the simple things like flipping the patties,
Yeah, or playing in a cardboard box. It's like, and who's to say the cardboard box isn't more
Right.
real for SpongeBob than, what Squidward does? Because when Squidward, right, when Squidward tries to do something, right, when he tries to have the fine arts or the higher things, right, because there's something, playing a clarinet is a much higher in sort of the order of reality than playing in a cardboard box. But when Squidward does it, he's a shitty clarinet player. He can't play it worth a crap. Right? It's horrible, and you always seeing, like he always ends up like choking on the reed, right, when he plays his clarinet. So Squidward can't actually integrate properly sort of the higher patterns of reality, and so he is miserable. Whereas SpongeBob, despite being on a lower level, can integrate the patterns of reality well, and that's why he's much happier.
Right. SpongeBob's not trying to force himself into a certain category because like of what like Squidward's trying to force himself into the arts, into higher things, and I think he even goes and joins an ethno state of squids at one point.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. And all of that is basically Squidward trying to force himself into a category where he feels like he'll be happier instead of just accepting his circumstance as it is.
Yeah.
Can all be like SpongeBob in that regard.
You guys are both familiar with John Waters, and he talks about the absence of adults in the room who, when something obscene is going on in the world, they're like, well, hold on a second, like, stop. Like, we don't have that force in the world. So, for example, when someone tells you, I've never, been like this online, blah, blah, blah. But, like, when someone tells you, like, you need to wear a mask to walk into this room and buy a coffee, like, we don't have the authority to be like, shut the fuck up and, like, get the hell out of here. It's like, oh, well, because people don't have that sense of, like, or proper authority, and, like, everyone's just like everyone's like a servile or something, or like, sorry, I'll give another example. Maybe this is a better example, actually. In Ireland, during the situation, they were giving people hundreds of euro every week not to work, or like because you couldn't work. So like Ireland was very compliant with all the regulations. I spoke to a woman yesterday from Kyrgyzstan, and I asked her what was like in Kyrgyzstan, and she said, well, the government wasn't giving people any money, so they did one lockdown, and then the people started protesting and marching on the streets because, like, they needed to go back to work to, like, survive. So there was, like, in Ireland, you had the state paying people, and then it's like, okay, you're giving me money, so, like, I don't really, like, I'm not going to fight you. Kyrgyzstan, the government says, like, stop living your life. And the people are like, well, hold on a second, how the hell am I supposed to feed myself? So at that point, they get up and are like, screw this. I say all that to say, with SpongeBob, there's a lovely innocence and all that. But when the darkness comes, like when the tyranny comes, like, you need an adult in the room. And so, like, I don't know, I just thought that was like, it's like, well, why can't we just be kids playing in a box? And why isn't that lovely? Like, yes, that's lovely. But the problem is, like, there are bad guys out there, and
Right.
they're coming for you. They're unironically coming for you and your children.
Right.
And like, so you need, I don't know, man. You need to, like, guard against that in some way.
Sometimes you have to be Squidward. That's the moral of the story. Squidward is the one guy that stands up to the establishment on multiple occasions in SpongeBob.
Interesting.
He actually riots outside the Krusty Krab and gets SpongeBob on board at one point because the Krusty Krab is unfair. Mr. Krabs is in there standing at the concession plotting his oppression, and he gets SpongeBob in on it. And then in the SpongeBob movie, Squidward is one of the last people to get brainwashed by Plankton. Right? All of Bikini Bottom is hypnotized by the buckets on the heads of people and turns them into Plankton slaves. And Squidward is the last one to get brainwashed, and he stands up to Plankton.
That's epic.
Yeah, and then goes down in a fight, right? And so there's pros and cons to, sometimes you got to be Squidward, but it would be nice to be SpongeBob.
On that note, I heard Peterson the other day talking about. He was asked about people who are cynical, right? And then it's like, well, cynicism, we think of it as a negative thing, but it's better than being naive, right? But then obviously you want to graduate from cynicism. And what would you call that? Like awake optimism or something? I don't know. What would you guys say is the graduation beyond cynicism? And is it right to say there is no such character? Maybe that's the moral of the story on this point. Like there is no essentially virtuous or like substantially and consistently virtuous character in the whole show, who has graduated from naivety to cynicism and then from cynicism to what would you call that state?
I mean, I would say even like Sandy would probably be that character. Would you agree, Graham?
I think Sandy's definitely the closest. 1 second. I think what we would graduate. They would graduate from cynicism to the peak experience.
Yeah.
Like Maslow's peak experience, and his, they would fulfill all the. No one in Bikini Bottom has climbed the hierarchy of needs and fulfilled every category and had that wonderful experience of, oh, I'm okay with everything. So they're all immature and kind of at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy. But anyway, back to Sandy being the closest. Yeah, I would say Sandy is the closest. But, the thing that marks her, she's kind, she's intelligent, but she is always going to be a foreigner in Bikini Bottom.
Yeah.
And for that reason, she can never integrate and fully be that character that's totally good and fulfilled, to the extent that she even blows up Patrick. One time she lassos Patrick and yanks him back while Sandy is chasing SpongeBob and Patrick, and then Patrick in the background just freaking explodes.
Get a dog! Get a dog, little honky! Get a dog!
And like a plume of fire, and all because Patrick insulted her hometown, Texas. And that is a prime example of how, you can be the greatest person around, but if you're a foreigner to, as it were, you'll never really fully integrate and give people the benefit of you being the best person in the room, because they will never accept it, because the way that you express your fulfillment and you're being the best person in the room, the way that you express that won't be accepted by the people in the room, because they don't understand that at all.
Yeah, because she's like, once again, it's not, there's a reason why she has an astronaut suit on, right? Because she's in a foreign place and she comes from above. I mean, this is why scuba suits and astronaut suits, or at least they used to, but they look very similar, because when you put one on, right, it's signifying you're going into a different world, be it up or down. So no, she can't ever fully integrate into Bikini Bottom, because when she's in their world, she has to put on her suit, and when they come into her world, they have to put on their suits.
Philip, why is she? Unless you're going to continue, but if you're finished with that point, can you talk about why is she from the South, the American South? And just for context, as everyone knows, in general, people laugh at the South and like ridicule it, and people are stupid and they don't believe in evolution and they're overweight and uneducated, etc. So, what's the significance of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's once again to add to the inverted pattern of her being the smartest character, right? So squirrels are not associated with being intelligent animals. They're very stupid. They run out in the middle of the road and get flattened by cars, right? So Sandy...
That actually happened to me today on the way to church.
Yeah, exactly.
I ran over a squirrel today. It fell from an oak tree after the 2 days of rain and fell like right on top of my hood and then flopped on the road, and I just ran over it.
Yeah, exactly. They're stupid animals, right? No one thinks of a squirrel as like being intelligent. Squirrels aren't intelligent animals. But because she's in the inverted upside down world, she is the most intelligent animal. She is the most intelligent creature there, right? People from the South are not associated with being very intelligent. I mean, of course, Graham and I are quite intelligent, but for the most part, people from the South are considered extremely stupid, extremely slow. They talk like this, right? They're considered to be extremely unintelligent, uninformed, right? Well, And what do we associate scientists with now? Because we're modernist materialists, we associate like people who are scientists as the smartest people, right? So it's no coincidence that she's also a scientist, because once again, the swirl, stupid, South, stupid, Texas, stupid, right? They so there's all these things, there's all these associations, right? And that's why she blows Patrick up, is because he's making fun of the South, and the association is Texas equals South equals stupid within that episode. So it just adds more to this inverted pattern of the Texas Southern squirrel scientist being, is the smartest one rather than the stupidest thing. And the stupidest thing is supposed to be the one with the most subtle body that gives light, that's the most intelligent, which is Patrick, and he is in fact the most unintelligent creature in Bikini Bottom, because things are out of place.
Sandy, she fell out of the tree, as it were.
Yes, exactly.
The stupid squirrel fell out of the tree and hit the road and got hit by a car.
Yeah.
One thing I want to touch on, Philip, this one is for you. Sandy's house, I'll try to put a picture up on the screen, is a glass dome that sits on the sea floor. Inside of the glass dome, it's the pressure is normal. There's even a tree and there's like some grass. And like Philip referenced earlier, you have to, the sea animals, they don't get on well in Sandy's dome. But the dome kind of represents another world within Bikini Bottom. It's a half of a sphere. It's glass, and it sits on the floor like a cyst or a wart or a zit, something that doesn't belong. And it's half of a world, right? And in that half world is land, and then the other half of the world is the sea. And God notoriously separated land and sea. So what's the symbolism there, Philip?
Yeah, right. I mean, once again, it becomes that inability to sort of integrate things, right? If you if Sandy were to try, like within the world, right, things are in their proper place. So you don't have monkeys living in the sea, although you have a thing called sea monkeys, but it's not the same thing, right? You don't have dogs living in the sea, and you don't have fish living on land, because it doesn't work. So right, there's a proper balance between heaven and earth, or land and sea, if you will, in this case. But they still can't mix, right, fully, right? There's not a full mixture there. So if Sandy were to try to fully integrate heaven and earth, or the dome, or the land and the dry land and the sea, right, in a way she would lose her knowledge, right? So in the Bible and in ancient cosmologies, the symbol of space, the symbol of structure, the symbol of order is dry land coming out of the sea. Right, we see this on the third day of creation. We see this with Christ in the underworld, right? He rises from below on the third day. We see this with Jonah and the whale. He rises out of the sea on the third day. So there's this association with land being above the sea. Well, now it's so inverted that now the land is beneath the sea, and you're like, well, this doesn't make any sense, right? This is an inverted pattern. So if Sandy were to try to integrate the water into her dome, what would happen? Well, she would die, right? She would lose life. She would lose knowledge. She would lose everything. And in a way,
and
right,
that did actually almost happen in an episode.
Yeah,
I don't know if you recall, but she got jealous because they were making fun of her for being in a suit, and then she took her suit off and then proceeded to almost suffocate. But her pride was so large that she was, her Texan pride was just so massive. She thought, I'll just take my suit off, and then she had to get saved by a pickle jar.
Yeah, and then same thing.
Even if she wanted to integrate, she couldn't.
Yeah, and then in another episode, right, SpongeBob tries to go into the dome without a water helmet on, right, without a bucket of water on his head. And what happens to him? Well, he almost dies.
I don't need it. I don't need it. I definitely don't need it. I 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 need it!
Because he, right, the sea can't integrate into the dry land because it's too much space, it's too much structure for SpongeBob. Despite him being a square, the dry land it's too much space for him. So with SpongeBob's problem is he can't integrate because it's too much structure, whereas Sandy can't integrate because if she does, it's a flood and it kills her. So yeah, you have this backwards thing going on. That's quite interesting.
15 minutes later.
Okay, After an awkward transition, we're going to wrap things up here because we are not running out of things to talking about, but we're running on fumes. There's plenty to talk about, and we might do a second episode. So stay tuned. But before we cut it, Fergus, Philip, any final remarks before we depart?
No.
Yeah, I mean, I think once again the importance of SpongeBob is, while once again the authors of the show might not be conscious of it, I think that these inverted patterns that we see popping up in our world today of fish popping out of the sea, if you will, because this has been some of the common themes in SpongeBob, is the fish popping out of the sea, the upside down bathrooms, and all these other sort of things. The answer we have is to, really in an inverted way, is to become like SpongeBob, is to become like a child, to sort of regain that innocence, I think, to sort of regain that humility. So yeah.
Well said, well said. Okay, well, there it is. Thanks for joining, Fergus. Thanks for joining, Philip. And we'll see you guys next time, maybe in a second episode of the SpongeBob Symbolism Special. All right, peace.